What if I told you a man lived for 30 years with a wife he never truly chose? What if everything he believed, his marriage, his love, his family, was built on a secret, a dangerous charm? And then one morning, he woke up and remembered everything. The woman beside him became a stranger. The children he raised meant nothing to him, but the name he screamed was the woman he was supposed to marry. This is not just a story of betrayal, it is a story of destiny delayed, truth revealed, and a love that refused to die. Stay with me because what happens next will shock you and remind you that no matter how long it takes, God's plan will always prevail. Welcome to Olu Beauty African Folktales channel. Here we tell you the way it is. Have you subscribed? If not, oh yeah, run kitty kitty, run kata kata, subscribe, like, comment and share. Share it with your families and friends. And don't forget to touch the bell button so that you'll be notified each time we put out new video. Oh yeah, grab your popcorn, sit jeje and enjoy yourself. Oh yeah, let's go there. In the quiet, wealthy streets of London lived Mr. Uchenna Ojemba, a respected Igbo businessman whose name commanded honor both in the UK and back home in Nigeria. For 30 years, he had been married to his beautiful wife, Judith, and together they raised 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls: Kenechukwu, Tobenna, Ifeanyi, Adaobi, and Ujunwa, the last born. They lived a life of luxury, but also of strict tradition. Every December, no matter how busy life became, the Ojemba family returned to their ancestral home in Nigeria. This was not just a family choice, it was a sacred rule established by Uchenna's father, Mazi Ojemba. And he told them and he said, no matter where you live in this world, once it is December, you must come home and celebrate Christmas as one family. Okay? He told them. And for decades, they obeyed. The morning, everything changed. That year marked 30 years of Uchenna's marriage. The entire family traveled to the village as usual. Laughter filled the compound. Preparations for New Year celebrations were everywhere. Then came January 1st. Early in the morning, the Hamatan air was cold that morning. A strange silence hung over the compound, as if the village itself was holding its breath. Inside the master bedroom, Judith was still asleep, wrapped in the warmth of her husband's body. Then suddenly, Uchenna's eyes snapped open. He sat up slowly. His breathing became heavy. His eyes moved around the room, confused, searching, unfamiliar. Then his gaze fell on Judith. He froze. His face twisted in fear and anger. He jumped out of the bed as if he had seen a ghost. And he said, "Who are you?" Judith woke up instantly, her heart pounding. And she answered and said, "Oh, Uche, what kind of joke is this now?" But he stepped back, shaking, and he shouted again and said, "Don't come close to me. How did you enter my room? Who sent you?" His voice echoed through the house. Within seconds, footsteps filled the corridor. The door burst open. Kenechukwu rushed in first, and he said, "Daddy, what's going on here?" Mr. Uchenna turned to him sharply, and his eyes was cold, empty, unfamiliar. And he said, "Who are you?" The room went still. Tobenna, the second son, laughed nervously and said, "Daddy, stop this now. It's me, Tobenna. Why are you asking who are you?" Mr. Uchenna shouted and said, "Get out!" He roared. Adobe, his first daughter, began to cry, and she said, "Mommy, what is happening? What is going on, Mommy?" But Judith was no longer speaking. Her body had gone cold. Her lips trembled because deep down she knew. So the children quickly called their grandfather, Mazi Ojemba, the patriarch. At first, he feared the worst, and he muttered and said, "Has my son lost his mind?" When Mazi Ojemba arrived the compound was already filled with whispers. He walked in slowly, leaning on his staff, his presence commanding silence, and he said, "Where is my son?" They led him inside. Mr. Uchenna sat on a chair, breathing heavily, watching everyone like strangers. Mazi Ojemba studied him carefully. Then he spoke softly and said, "Uchenna, my son, do you know me?" Uchenna looked at him for a moment. Something flickered, and he said, "Papa, why are you asking me, do I know you?" A sign of relief swept the room. But it didn't last. Mr. Uchenna asked another question to his father and said, "Papa, where is Chinwe?" The room froze again. Mr. Ojemba's grip tightened on his staff and he said, "Which Chinwe?" Mr. Uchenna replied and said, "The woman I am supposed to marry. Why is she not here? What is going on, Papa?" At that moment, Mazi Ojemba knew this was not madness. This was something deeper, something spiritual. Then Mazi Ojemba called a family meeting. Elders, kinsmen, and relatives gathered. Then all eyes turned to Judith. The meeting was intense. Elders sat in a circle. The air was heavy. Judith sat in the middle, surrounded by eyes that demanded truth. "Speak," one elder said. She shook her head and she said, "I don't know anything, no, I don't know anything." Slap. Why? The sound shook everyone. It was her own mother. "Stop lying. Do you want to destroy us?" She told her. Judith burst into tears. Her body shook violently. Then she screamed and said, "Yes, I did it. I did it. Oh, I did it." Silence. Even the birds outside seems to stop chirping. And she continued and said, "I did it because I loved him." Her voice cracked and she continued, "I couldn't watch my best friend take the man I wanted." Her breathing became unstable. She continued, almost choking on her words, and she said, "I went to a dibia. He gave me something." She confessed how everything started. She told them that Chinwe was her best friend. The room froze. And she said, Uchenna wanted to marry Chinwe, not her. She revealed the unimaginable thing. She said, on the very day Uchenna was going for his marriage introduction with Chinwe, she went to a witch doctor. She obtained a charm. Then she blocked the road leading to Chinwe's house, pretending to be stranded. Judith told them that she was standing in the middle of the road, pretending to be helpless. So when Mr. Uchenna drove to that spot, he stopped and asked her and said, "Are you okay?" So she said, immediately their eyes met. That was the moment everything changed. She continued and said, "The charm made it possible for him to marry anyone else but me." Gasp filled the room. But it didn't end there. Her voice dropped and she continued and said, "I had to renew it every year, every December." The children stared at her in horror and they shouted and said, "You mean our father?" Ifeanyi couldn't complete the sentence. Judith nodded slowly, tears flowing uncontrollably, and she continued with a broken voice and said, "This year I went back, but the Dibia, the witch doctor, is dead, and everything broke. There was no one to renew it for me. That was why everything broke." Everyone was shocked. The family, the elders, the kinsmen, everyone was shocked and embarrassed at her confession. But Mr. Uchenna got up in anger and he warned her not to enter his house again. Even the children, he ordered everyone not to enter his house again. But his father, Mazi Ojemba, as a good man he was, he told the children to stay in the family house for now. So when the family investigated further about Chinwe, they found Chinwe, but her story was even more heartbreaking. Before everything happened, Chinwe was pregnant for Uchenna. She tried to reach him, but he had vanished emotionally and physically. Alone and rejected by her parents, she left the village and started life from scratch. She gave birth to twin boys, Uchechukwu, named after Uchenna. Chidindo means God lives. She raised them with pain, dignity, and strength. Now grown, one lived in Germany, the other managed their business in Lagos. On hearing all this, the family decided not to tell Mr. Uche the whole truth about Chinwe, but they only gave him address where he can find Chinwe because inside them they said they don't want to be the one to reveal the secret to Mr. Uche about his twins' children. Remember, after the confession of Judith, Mr. Uchenna was filled with anger and betrayal. So, because of that, he ordered Judith and her children to leave his house immediately. But the children rejected the actions of their mother. They told their mother that what she did was wrong. So they refused to follow her. Then the final decision was made by the elders. They told Judith that she committed an abomination. So because of that, Judith was cast out. But the children she bore for Uchenna, they will remain his children, whether he accepted them or not. They carried his blood, and one day he would accept them, they told them. When all this was settled, Uchenna began searching for Chinwe with the direction his family gave him. The journey to find Chinwe was not easy. When he finally located her, she was no longer the young, vibrant girl Uchenna once knew. Life had hardened her. Strength had replaced innocence. When she saw Mr. Uchenna standing at her shop entrance, she froze The basket in her hand dropped. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then she laughed, a painful, bitter laugh, and she said, "So you finally remembered I exist?" She asked. Mr. Uchenna stepped forward, tears in his eyes, and he said, "Chinwe, I don't." She snapped. Her voice was sharp, and she said, "Don't say my name like you have the right, okay?" The people gathered, watching. She pointed at him again and said, "Do you know what I went through because of you?" Her voice broke, and she continued, "I was pregnant, alone, rejected." Uchenna staggered back as if struck. "I tried to find you," she continued. "I sent messages. I waited." Tears poured down her face as she continued. "But you never came." Silence. Then, softly, she said lastly, "I buried you in my heart a long time ago, so I don't know why you are here." That evening, two young men walked into the compound, tall, confident. Their presence commanded attention. When Mr. Uchenna saw them, his heart skipped. They looked exactly like him. Same eyes, same posture, same aura. "Who are they?" he whispered. Chinwe stepped forward. Her voice was calm but powerful, and she said, "They are your sons." The world stopped. Uchenna's leg gave way. He fell to his knees. Tears rushed down his face uncontrollably. The first son spoke and said, "My name is Uchechukwu." The second added, "I am Chidendo." Then the final blow. They told Mr. Uchenna, and they said, "We have always answered Uchenna because our mother said our father is a great man." Uchenna broke completely. After meeting his sons, Mr. Uchenna was no longer the same man. The pride, the ego, the authority people once feared, all of it was gone. He became quiet, humble, almost unrecognizable. Every morning, before the sun rose, he would sit outside Chinwe's house, waiting, not forcing his way in, not demanding forgiveness, just waiting, watching, hoping. The people began to whisper, and they said, "Is this not the same Uchenna Ojemba?" And some replied, "Yes, but this time he was a man seeking mercy, not control." Uchechukwu and Chidendo were not quick to accept him. They respected him, but they didn't know him. One evening, the three of them sat outside under the moonlight. There was silence for a while. Then Uchechukwu spoke. "Where were you all these years?" he asked. The question pierced like a knife. Mr. Uchenna swallowed hard. Tears filled his eyes, and he said, "I was alive, but I was not living my own life." They listened. He told them everything, the charm, the deception, the lost years. When he finished, silence returned. Then Chidindo asked quietly and said, "If you had known, would you have come for us?" Mr. Uchenna didn't hesitate, and he said, "I would have searched the whole world until I found you." He told them. That was the moment something shifted. Not fully healed, but the wall had cracked. Chinwe watched everything from a distance. Her heart was at war. One part of her still held the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, but another part still remembered the man she once loved. One night, she knelt beside her bed. For the first time in years, she prayed about Uchenna, and she said, God, why bring him back now? Tears rolled down her face. After I have already learned to live without him, silence filled the room. Then peace came quietly into her heart. A gentle voice within her spirit seemed to say, because what I have joined together, no man, no charm, no power can destroy forever. She broke down and cried, but this time it was not pain, it was release. The next morning, Chinwe stepped outside. Mr. Uchenna was there as usual, sitting, waiting. She walked slowly toward him. His heart began to race. Chinwe, he said. She raised her hand gently and said, let me speak. He nodded. Her voice was calm but deep, and she said, you hurt me too much. And he said, I know. I suffered alone. And he replied again and said, I know. I became both mother and father to our children. Uchenna lowered his head in shame. Then she paused, took a deep breath, and said the words that changed everything. But I choose to forgive you, she told him. Uchenna looked up sharply. Tears filled his eyes instantly. He fell to his knees and he said, thank you, she continued. Not because you deserve it, but because God forgave me too. Silence, powerful silence. Then she stretched out her hand and said, stand up, Uche, let's start again. That evening, something beautiful happened. For the first time, they sat together as a complete family. Mr. Uchenna, Chinwe, Uchechukwu, Chidendo. They ate, they laughed, they shared stories. Mr. Uchenna listened to everything he had missed, their childhood struggles, their mother's sacrifices, their journey to success. At some point, he became overwhelmed. Tears streamed down his face again, and he said, I missed so much. Chidindu smiled softly and said, but you are here now. Uchechukwu added and said, and that is what matters, okay? Back in London, when Mr. Uche finally returned to London, he called a family meeting. Judith was gone, but the children she bore for him remained. They stood before him, unsure. He looked at them with new understanding and he said, what your mother did was wrong. They bowed their heads and he continued, but you all are my children. Tears filled their eyes and he continued and said, nothing will change that. He opened his arms and one by one they embraced him. A new family was formed, not perfect, but healed. Months later, a grand celebration was held in the village. Music filled the air. Laughter echoed across the compound. Mr. Uchenna stood beside Chinwe, holding her hand, not in secret, not in regret, but in honor. Their children, all of them, stood around them. Unity, peace, and restoration. Thank you for watching. This is where our story ends. But before we end it, let's look into our moral lessons. What is built on deception will never have true peace. Destiny can be delayed, but not destroyed. Forgiveness is the key to true healing and freedom. God's plan is always greater than human manipulation. No matter how long it takes, truth will always prevail. In conclusion, what God has destined for you, no man can steal permanently. Delay is not denial. Even when life is manipulated by evil, God can rewrite the story. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is divine strength. And when God restores, He restores completely. And just like that, after 30 long years, what was stolen was finally restored. A love that was manipulated found its way back. A father who lost everything gained even more. And a broken family was made whole again. But the biggest lesson remains this: no matter how far the truth is buried, it will always rise again. No matter how delayed your destiny feels, it can never be destroyed. And when God steps in, everything changes. Thank you once again for watching. Please, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories like this. Tell me in the comment section, do you think Judith deserved forgiveness? And what would you have done if you were Chinwe? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And please, don't forget to touch the bell button so that you'll be notified each time we put out new video. Until next time, stay blessed. And remember, God always has the final say. Thank you all for watching. God bless you all. Bye bye. Love you. Mwah.